A very good morning, a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine. Morning, it's afternoon already. I need to check my watch. Lovely to have you all with us as we kick off another week of wine. And we kick off in some style today. Now, if you'll remember not that long ago, I was inundating the interweb with photos of a rather glamorous wine dinner down in Cape Town, one that got plenty of attention and feedback. It was a dinner that was in celebration of an upcoming Strauss auction as one of the greatest collections of wine ever to go to market in South Africa found its way onto the horizon of Roland Peens, and from there on to Strauss. We're kicking off this Sunday, the first of what I think will be several auctions of quite extraordinary wine kicks off. And by extraordinary wine, I mean not just some of the great wines, but some of the great vintages as well. As per the dinner I had in Cape Town, everything from a 2005 Petrus as the youngest, down to a 59 La Mission Haut Brion from 1959, and in between, everything from Lafite and Latour to Angelus and Cheval Blanc. It was a quite extraordinary evening, certainly the most wonderful selection of wine I've had the chance to try on one night. And so we thought we'd have a look at some of that wine, the importance of Bordeaux, and do so with a few of the people who were at that dinner. And so joining me on the show this evening will be Roland Peens, the man who's put it all together, and he's got an encyclopedic knowledge of the vintages and the terroir of Bordeaux. Emile Joubert, as fine a wine writer as South Africa can lay claim to, with plenty of experience, and he also knows Bordeaux rather well. And then for some winemaking expertise, Smit, who was also at that dinner, the man behind the ridiculously successful Damascene wines that sell out in seconds every time there are new vintages. And so Jean can not only give us an update on those vintages, but also from a winemaking perspective, tell us just why he feels the wines that are on sale this Sunday are quite so important and how they have inspired him. So there's a trip to Bordeaux with a little touch of South Africa on Dan Really Likes Wine this evening. Before we do that, though, let's have a quick look at some later wine news. Well, let's kick off with some news from my local. This is up the road, the Old Oak, the restaurant at Royal Johannesburg, with Chef Ransley Peterson, ex-Overture, getting increasing acclaim. Food yesterday for lunch was terrific, and that is unsurprising. What was nice, though, is that Roland Sommelier has gone shopping, and he's dug up some older wine, and I put this on both to showcase it to you if you're in the area and you want to go try something, but also as a reminder of the quality of older South African wine. We're going to be talking about some older French wine in a moment. But the two bottles that were brought out for us yesterday, some 2005 Syrah from Neil Ellis, and a little later on we had some 2010 Grenache. Both of these showing absolutely no sign of wear and tear, none of that slight loss of color around the edges, no little hint of anything metallic. It was just all rich and luscious and deep and beautiful. And Neil Ellis there, coming from two different vineyards, the Grenache there from up in Picaniere's Kloof, so a cooler and higher and well suited to Grenache, although with age not as quite as light and fruity as when it would have started out. And then that Syrah, that was from the Jonkershoek Valley. So there we go, you can see there on the label. So Neil Ellis heading off to some different vineyards and bringing in some grapes to add to the Neil Ellis name, both of those having just aged beautifully. So Old Oak at Royal Johannesburg, as usual, well worth dropping in. And now some vintage wine on their list. All right, this was Friday afternoon, and dropped in at Winex, Michael Fridjon's celebration of South African wine. We got in some filming there. It was nice and quiet to start with. By 7 o'clock when I left, the place was heaving, and lots of familiar faces. There was some creation going down. Onoma, Blaze and his Greek wine. On the right there, that would be Dane Rath with two wonderful T-shirts, Bordeaux, I can see Emile wearing one of those, and a Chateau Middle Class. That's from the collection of the Cape Collective. And then a whole pile of wine, including bottom right there, Le Chant. And they've now opened their wine bar in Stellenbosch. Thankfully, because we only had 806 wine bars in Stellenbosch, and clearly we needed 807. It was a great few days. Lovely to see Winex back. Lovely to see it so well supported. Well done, Michael Fridjon on another terrific event. And then also had the chance to catch up with Michael Radcliffe, who turned 50 over the weekend. Happy birthday, Michael. And that bottle between us is the 2020 vintage of the Villafante Series C. Now, the good news is that gets released tomorrow. The bad news is if you're not on the allocation list, you shall be watching enviously from afar. It is already fully subscribed. It'll be heading out. Probably your best bet is to try and find your local retailer, if they've got a relationship with Villafante, that might be able to slip you a bottle or two. Probably the big thing with this, aside from 2020 being far too young to be anywhere near its best, as drinkable as it most certainly was when I tried it last week, we often think of those Villafante wines as being big and powerful and kind of earlier Californian style red powerhouses. This is not. There's a lot more finesse and elegance to it. It's a far gentler wine than you might be anticipating. It's going to age exceptionally. In fact, they reckon at Villafante about 20, 25 years. So a little way to go. But yeah, slightly different style than you might be anticipating, and one that is well worth trying. Mike doing a great job of producing that wine in between his other job as assistant to Roland Peens at Wine Advisors. Speaking of which, we have Mr. Peens ready to join us on today's show. So let's say hello to my special guests. It is Roland, it is Emile, and it is Jean. Gentlemen, welcome. Lovely to have you all, and thank you so much for joining us.
Bonjour, monsieur. Good morrow.
Thanks very much. I'm getting a little warm flash of nostalgia here, given that it was only a few weeks when the three of us were together with a couple of others down at Aubergine for just a quite wonderful, wonderful night. Before I ask you, Roland, to detail exactly what was there, I must start with you, Emile, because you have done extraordinary things in a life of wine and indulgence. How far up the kind of the Top Gear lap testing time list would that particular Bordeaux dinner have sat in Emile Joubert's list of great nights of wine?
I really have to say that I'm still trying to work it out, Dan. It's like watching a rugby game with Phil Bennett at fly half, Morné du Plessis at eighth man, Frick Dupree at lock, JPR Williams at fullback in their prime. It was truly, truly overwhelming. I've been privileged to have some of those same wines individually at various occasions, which truly blew my mind. I mean, I have no shadow of doubt that Bordeaux is the mothership of the world of wine, and its wines are still the greatest liquid items that the human species has been honored to be exposed to. And that lineup was just incredible. I mean, I don't know how I managed to gate crash that party, so thanks for turning a blind eye. But just the breadth of experience, the five first growths, those iconic wines in the right bank, just you could sense the provenance before even having the wine in front of you. You can just sense the provenance looking at those bottles. And it was a bit overwhelming. I felt that having those wines over 2 days, I probably could have got more of an insight, but it was truly magical. And I mean, I'm not a winemaker. I don't have a WSET. I haven't been trained in winemaking. I'm just a wine lover and passionate about wine. And I fall for all the romance and the history and the culture of great wine. And what we had that night was totally, totally blown away. I mean, to ask me to select and pull out one or two, I did that on my blog, but I mean, that was actually just irrelevant, just to give people an idea of what was on the table. But each wine was absolutely brilliant, superlative. And everything that you read about Bordeaux, all the hype that's made about it, all the history that's been documented on Bordeaux, one can taste it. And that's the great thing about wine, is that unlike a lot of other products or items in history, I mean, it's written about in tomes and it creates dreams, it stirs the imagination. But actually having the opportunity to viscerally and directly engage with those wines it's just phenomenal. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. You know me, Dan, I'm totally unemotional about these things. And I really, we'll probably get into the wines later on, but it really was right up there. And if any of your Strauss customers put a tasting like this together again, I will beg, steal, borrow. I won't gatecrash this time. I will pay my way, because to have that experience, once in a lifetime experience, it's a once in a lifetime experience you want to repeat. And I would really love to repeat that. It was just totally mind blowing. It's difficult for me to put into words, because in this society where we have so much communication about wine, we've got fantastic new producers, fantastic new wine styles from different countries, exceptional brands coming out. To go back to the Garden of Eden of wine and to be a part of that, and to have that actually in your body now, if I may say so. I got a lot of space for that, obviously. It's just mind-blowing. It's actually just, it's re-jarred my approach to wine. And as a writer, that's a fantastic thing about this product. You can never learn enough, and you can always go to experiences which reignites your passion for wine and rekindles the magic of this product that we're dealing with. And that's why I think people are fortunate to go to tastings like these. You know, you need it as a wine lover. You need to go and experience these incredible products.
Right, I think Emile liked the evening. I think that's my takeaway there. So if you're thinking, right, well, what is all of this wine that's got so experienced a wine writer as Emile Joubert completely worked up and beside himself with joy? Well, let's go over to Roland and get the backstory. Life as Roland Peens is generally pretty good. You get to encounter lots of lovely wine, drink plenty of it, and have a great time. What was your response, though, Roland, when somebody got in touch with you and said, we've got this collection of wine. We'd like you to try and sell it for us. This is what we have.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning and or afternoon, and thanks, Emile. What an introduction to the evening and to the collection. I guess I've been honored to take care of this collection, Dan. It's almost surreal, the kind of wines that are in the cellar, and I've experienced a lot of these wines in my life, so I realized what a task was ahead, and it's going to take 2 or 3 years to sell this entire collection. And we had to put in a serious strategy forward to the cellar to make sure that we got the maximum value out of the cellar and that we could use it to its maximum ability. So we convinced him to put a certain amount aside for tastings, for educational tastings, for charity dinners, like we did a couple of weeks ago. And in that way, we can share the wines and sell them at the same time, because these wines are becoming, as you know, very, very expensive. And therefore, the average wine lover, or even the non-average winemaker that should be tasting and experiencing these wines, they're not experiencing these wines. And it's, for me, it's been a real driver of my passion, tasting these wines, experiencing these wines. And I think every wine producer, marketeer, director should be in contact with these wines to fully appreciate how they've got so good, how they've got so expensive, how they're traded, how they're sold, and how they're made. We have to know what the best is doing. Otherwise, we can't expect to do that on our own level. So they're very important wines to the market. When I was in the industry 20 years ago, we used to drink these wines more often, to be honest, and that's really because they were a lot less expensive. So they're accessible, and today that's less so. But what I can say, Dan, is, you know, if you really love these wines and you want to be around them, there are people out there that love sharing them, and that's the great thing about fine wine. No one really drinks a great bottle of wine by themselves. It's all about sharing. And so we were able to do that a couple of weeks ago, share these wines. It was a difficult task to try and put together an evening where you're getting enough experience out of each wine, but you're also tasting all of the great wines of Bordeaux in one evening. And that was difficult to achieve. And I had to test out the model a few times, which was tiresome work, Dan, really tough. We did one a couple months ago back at Aubergine with Harold, where we had similar wines with all the staff of Strauss and of Wine Cellar, just to understand these wines and learn how to sell them. So yeah, it's been a journey so far. It's going to take another couple of years, but so far so good. We just love experiencing and showing off these wines. And then the other point I wanted to make, Dan, was it's very easy to look at these wines and say it's just elitist goods. It's not attainable to anyone. Well, these wines have become assets, very much like artworks are traded. These wines are unlikely going to go down in price over the next decades. Some of these wines will last for 100 years. And over that time, they've proven to outperform inflation. They just become more rare with time. So not only is it an indulgence, and it certainly is, it's an education for the great winemakers. You know, if I was a winemaker, young winemaker, I'd be putting together a fund, or I'd ask my boss to put together some money and buy these wines with some friends and drink them and experience them, because it's an important part of your education. But they're also assets, and you could literally buy these wines and over time they're going to be more and more valuable. So they're a great store of value.
All right, well, let's start having a look at them and go to that very, very first flight. Now, this was a flight that included some 2005 Chateau Petrus with its immediately iconic label. I think we've got a photo of the flight with the three of them, the Petrus, the youngest of the wines for the night, which we can pop up there. There we go. We also had some Angelus, and we had some Chateau Ozon from 2000. Jean Smit, as a winemaker, this kicked off our evening at Aubergine. It wasn't the worst way to get a dinner underway, was it, John?
Yes, no, it was. First of all, I just need to thank quite a few people, actually, because this wouldn't have been possible just if it was up to me. So David, my partner in Damascene, first of all, for him just to give one of his tickets to me to enjoy this with him. I think he just enjoyed to see how the smoke came out of my ears with all the wheels just turning at the speed of light in my head, tasting these wines. But also, first of all, obviously for the Coates family to do this for people with trauma. I think it's phenomenal to do that. And then also just Chef Harold to host us at Aubergine and to actually have food going with these wines, to showcase the wines and not only his food. I think that was an absolutely phenomenal experience. But yeah, so as Emile said earlier, he actually spoke about also connecting it to sport. For me, it was I was thinking for the past week of really what it felt like to me, and for me being an avid tennis supporter, and just basically that's my free time is watching tennis. It was thinking of everyone like the Yannick Noahs and Agassiz and Michael Changs and all the greats in the past few decades, and it really felt like just hitting a few balls in the backyard with Federer, and just kind of going through all the highlights of the past few decades and just perfecting your grip on your own game while doing it. It was really for me a mind-blowing experience. I mean, obviously Damascene, the brand is basically of when you have a moment. And I must say there was certainly quite a few moments on that evening. Just to kind of backtrack of if you have the Cheval Blanc that was in this lineup, I mean, until 1964 they didn't export a single bottle. It was everything that was done in cask going abroad. So it was to just have a bottle of that and experience what 82 can be like was for me mind-blowing. My favorite Bordeaux was always Haut Brion, and both those Cheval Blanc and Haut Brion just in 89 and 82, which were really hot vintages, and just how they can actually get to have perfume in those wines, have like saffron coming through in the wines, and throughout the lineup, I mean, I think the other guys will always also tell you that we didn't speak once about oaking or anything like that. It was just pure balance and terroir. So for me, that's really something that I took from the entire flight. There was obviously amazing little intricacies that you try and memorize, but it was really just the whole experience was for me something phenomenal. If you look back at something like in the 1600s. Haut Brion, still it was the Pontac family that had a tavern in London where it was basically the Pontac's head, and they had also a barrel of Haut Brion, and the people tried it in the 1600s and thought it was quite okay claret, and just look at where they are today. By building brands, and also just with En Premier. I mean, I think Roland should be talking more about En Premier and how it works. But I think we need to backtrack and see how it was. It was actually in the 1700s. The guys were struggling to pay their farmers and their workers to actually they had to sell the wines in April to basically being able to pay for their workers and for. Obviously, now we know what the structure is all about and all the politics and everything that's behind that. But we need to see that there's a bigger history of what was on the table that day, and that we certainly need to be thankful for.
It's much like Emile, somebody a little blown away by that collection of wine. We'll have another crack at talking about that first flight. Then let's go back to Roland. That opening salvo, the two bottles of 2000 coupled with that 2005 Petrus, and I think the takeaway from most people, Roland, with these three wines was as delightful as all three were. You almost felt ever so slightly guilty drinking them as comparatively young as they were.
Yeah, that was one of the tricky things to manage. We didn't want to only drink older wines in the evening. I think older wines are great to appreciate, but often they can be a little bit tiresome if you drink a lot of them. Certainly these wines, none of them tasted old, but they certainly were mature towards the back end. So I like a journey in the evening where you're starting out with young wines, finishing with old. You can also paint a bit of a picture of the story of the time of within Bordeaux. I mean, this was an era where Robert Parker was the de facto Bordeaux commentator, and whatever he commented on a wine, or whenever he scored a wine, especially towards 100 points, it would just shoot up in price, and it could make or break a chateau. So you had a lot of producers that were chasing this Bordeaux Parker style, which often meant really ripe vintages, lots of new oak, lots of extraction, lots of techniques within the cellar to manipulate the wine, and that wasn't the best for everyone, to be honest. It went against the classical Bordeaux model, and we were discussing on that evening that in 1961. They would use the press juice and the juice that would fall off out of the tanks and out of the press onto the floor. They would use that for the Grand Vin. Whereas in this time, they're using lasers to sort every single berry to make sure that it's at optimum ripeness. There's no marg going into the wine matter other than grapes. So a completely different period. And I think we've swung back 10 years later towards a balance between the two. But that said, we had Chateau Pavie, which was extremely modern at the time, and that wine was beautiful. I think the oak, the sweetness has all integrated, and that's really important. That thing that I've learned from Robert Parker's tasting over the last 30 years is that new oak and ripeness, when done well, it does integrate beautifully. And the Chateau Pavie, and to some extent the Margaux 96 that came later, I mean, those are new oak wines and they're picked optimally at ripe, and yet they're so super balanced and fresh and beautiful. And then Ozone and Petrus are just two magical wines that have this balance, this ethereal character to them. They're not the biggest wines in the world, although the Petrus was tannic. We gave it a few hours of decanting. It certainly was young. But just also nice to see that balance, that brightness of the wine. It really dances on your palate, and it's so fine in its essence that it really it puts it apart. And Ozone similar, because it's on this real limestone soil, it gives the wine so much more Burgundian elegance almost. And these wines are made in tiny quantities. You don't get to taste them often in your life. And when you do get to taste them, it's often en premiere, which is a difficult experience for most people to get their heads around. So to have them closer to maturity is a great, and especially in these great vintages. So it was a magic flight, and it was a great start to the evening because it gave us some context of what was to follow. And then really last comment on the left bank, those wines tend to need a bit more time. Whereas the right bank, you can drink young vintages, I find. The Merlot just seems to have a softer, more supple type of body, and it gives it an earlier drinking opportunity.
It gave, as Roland said, an indication of what was to come. What followed included a wine that many people had as their wine of the night, and that was no surprise because it was a wine that came with a heavyweight reputation. Emile, some 89 Haut Brion. It sat alongside some 89 Le Pen, which is not a wine for those without a very good relationship with their bank manager. That was round two, back to 1989. What did you make of those two, and that Haut Brion in particular?
Dan, that's a very unfair question to compare those. Like John, I'm a huge Haut Brion is a magical name in the world of wine for me. The only first growth outside of the Médoc, lying in Grave, and it was a wine that sort of led my introduction into Bordeaux back in the 80s. I was at a tasting with a one-person tasting with Pamela van Dyke Price, legendary wine writer, and she was taking me through some Australian Chardonnays. It was 85, 86, I think. I noted that in my blog. I can't remember now what I wrote, as most wine writers do. But anyway, and at the end of the tasting, she went to her fridge and said, I opened something for dinner last night, and it was a Haut Brion, and she started talking about the winery and the provenance and the fact that Samuel Pepys, the great British diarist in the 1600s. John's obviously waxed on his history because, it was 1600s already when Haut Brion was making a big name in London. It was the wine of King Charles II. Let's hope that King Charles III follows suit. And Samuel Pepys, they reckon, wrote the very first wine note in the world when he described Haut Brion in, I can't remember the terminology, but he said it had a very special and particular taste that made him memorize that. Obviously, I think he sent the note to Wine Mag, but they didn't publish it. It was just, and so Haut Brion comes to me with a lot of emotional baggage, positive baggage of the Louis Vuitton variety. And it's just great to see that wine met all my expectations of a great left bank Bordeaux. And, being a fan of Cabernet as well, and you don't want to compare countries and Cabernets, but what it showed me was immense persistency on the palate. I mean, the pourings were quite generous, and the wines, Roland did a fantastic job in decanting and ensuring they were in the correct order. But just that persistency and total breadth. I mean, if I had to go back, getting outside of my sort of left or right brain or left to right bank and the romantic side, if I just had to, one takeout from all those wines was the length. They just stayed on the palate, and they kind of allow the experience to overwhelm you. I don't know if the winemakers have that in mind, but obviously they'll say it's terroir. But those wines are just so memorable. I can actually taste them as I speak, and especially the Haut Brion did that for me. It just everything I expected is one of the reasons I really wanted to attend that tasting, and that wine is phenomenal. And as the Le Mission showed later on, with the 59, Haut Brion is made for the long haul. And, they come with these things about aging and old wines and so forth. Sometimes in South Africa, I was getting a guy coming to you saying he's got this bottle of wine from the 70s or the 60s or whatever. And just because the wine has survived, it doesn't mean it's good or it's aged well. But just to see the way these wines have aged was a phenomenal experience. But that's from the Haut Brion. So it ticked all the boxes I wanted from that experience, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And I could kind of pull out of my memory bank some of my experience with Cabernet, and I found some of it in there, which is great. But the Le Pen, Dan, I have to tell you, it just blew me away. I've never had Le Pen before, and I'm only interested in those chateaus which are hundreds of years old and so forth. But this thing, which is it's a modern producer, and I've been reading up about it, that wine to me was just incredible. And I'm glad Roland alluded to the sweetness. There was definitely a solid fruit core in the wine, but the total balance and the ethereal experience and the focus and the refinement, it was an extraordinarily delicious wine. I mean, you could have plonked that wine down. Any red wine lover would have said it's the best red wine they have ever tasted. But and that's one great thing about these wines for me. Yes, it was looking at them as works of art. But like you go to art galleries and you have to look at some painting and you think, well, okay, you know, 3-headed woman and 5-legged horses. It's a great artist, but you have to look at it because you've got to notch it off. But to actually taste these wines and experience that they warrant these reputations and so much more, and they're delicious. They are delicious to drink, really, truly lovely. I mean, I don't sit there with a notebook saying, I taste oak, there's a bit of alcohol, or there's a bit of tannin here, or perhaps in one of the two wines, and Roland, you're going to shoot me now, but one of the two wines, I picked up a slight little farmyard, but it just added to the whole experience, and the wines were absolutely delicious. And as far as the deliciousness goes, that Le Pen to me was just something else. It blew my mind. It made me look at Merlot and the right bank in a whole new light. But I must say, the wine I also really enjoyed from the right bank and was the Ozon. And when Roland started talking about the place and limestone soils, it kind of kicked in. That just was a delicious wine. But that Haut Brion next to the Le Pen, it was such a gorgeous experience. And it also showed to me, you know, it's just across the estuary, across the river, and two different grape varieties, but the immense diversity between those two wines. As I said, it was like a course, an educatory course in great wine, great experience of the classics.
It was a wonderful pairing from 89, and it was followed on by yet another lesson in the classics, this time slightly older, and 1982. Jean, if I can ask you to pick up here, we had some Lafite Rothschild, we had some Cheval Blanc, we had some Latour, which for me was as lovely as anything on the night. Tell me a little bit about not just your thoughts on those three wines in that flight, but also how these kind of wines inspire you as a winemaker.
Yeah, it's like I said, 82 being a hot vintage, you expect something completely different, actually. But I mean, just want to take it back to when I was at Rustenburg with Artie Barnos, when I was digging out a 20-ton tank one day. He came after a few minutes, and we always, if you were slow, they would always come and mock you and say, would you want a glass of water, sugar water? But he stopped me and he put this in my hand that day. It was a 82 Rustenburg, and that was the one that changed my perception of what is possible in South Africa. And if you have these three wines next to each other, then you realize that what the possibility of wine is in the entire world. And for me, I really want to take it back to the young winemakers out there. I'll never forget one year. We at the Vignerons tasting in Franschhoek, Lacotte's Ludwig Musk, he had a tasting that he had lined up for us, and I think half of the guys didn't even pitch up for the tasting. And that day he opened up a Haut Brion white, and it was that was the white wine that changed my complete perception of what is possible with white wine in the world. And it's wines like these that you need to taste. You need to try it. You need to do it over and over again. To do these vintages is going to be a once in a lifetime. That I can tell you. It's going to be harder and harder to actually be able to get your hands on any of these. But if the opportunity comes around, you need you need to be there. You need to dial in and just really don't try and copy what they do, but just and try and take a page out of their book as well and bring it back home. I think looking at these vintages as well and what's happening now with global warming, if you have a look at what is actually now being able to, what the guys are legally allowed to plant in Bordeaux, I mean, there's six varieties that's basically more drought resistant and also against global warming that they were allowed to now start planting from last year in Bordeaux. You need to be innovative. You need to think of what is possible within your country when it comes to Bordeaux blends, and that's, I think, from tasting these wines that really put that light on for me. The Latour as well, I think we also talk about brands in South Africa and what we need to do going forward. I mean, if you can do, that's 175,000 bottles at that price point, I think you need to maybe start farming closer to the equator that you can harvest twice a year. If you have that kind of business model, it's really something phenomenal and something that we can strive to do going forward. I think it's possible to at least go a notch closer to them. We don't have to even them, but we're certainly striving to get there.
I just love the way, whether it's Jean or it's Emile or it's Roland, everybody just lights up talking about this wine and the magic that it cast upon us all over the course of that evening. Roland, this wine is all on sale at the auction, and it includes stuff that is even older than what we have been speaking about. Tell us a little bit about the 61 Mouton Rothschild and the 59 Le Monsieur Haut Brion that we drank on the night, as well as some of the older wines that you've got coming up on the auction, because there are wines that go back well over 100 years on Sunday.
Yeah, Dan, some of these are icon Bordeaux from the this last 50 years, let's call it, but there are older wines going back even further in the cellar. The Coates family obviously collected deeply in Bordeaux, and they collected the greatest wines of Bordeaux, and were lucky enough to collect some very old bottles that are in a fantastic condition. So some of these wines, there could only be a handful left in the entire world. In some vintages, or maybe just tens, in the tens. These are very rare wines, and they obviously then get very expensive. But more so, they are drinkable and delicious, as Emile was alluding to earlier. Not only are these wines kept, but they are an incredible experience just to be around. And John noted Harold, when Harold was just able to get the right food with the right seasoning, with the right spice, with the right texture to pair with each course, knowing how old the wines were going to be and how they're going to perform. I don't think there's anyone in the country that could do it better than Harold. In fact, I know there's no one that could do it better than Harold in South Africa. We've done so many dinners with him, and he's able to do it with almost any wine that you put in front of him. So I think that was important in the evening. What's on show? 1899 Ikem, which Jancis gave 20 out of 20 not too long ago. The wines from Chateau Ikem, they age for forever, and they start getting quite unctuous. The 67 that we had on the evening, Dan, I mean, it was still young. It's going to go for another few decades at least. And then there's a 1864 Latour, which is hugely rare, and it could only be one of three on the planet still. 45 Mouton, which was one of the great wines of the 20th century. Robert Parker calls that, along with Jabelet 61 and Cheval Blanc 47, the three greatest wines that were made of the last century. Highly rare, and when it's in such great condition, these wines have been authenticated by the world's expert on authentication, Michael Egan. So we know that they're not fake; they're true bottles. Obviously, these wines would have been collected from all over the world. Obviously, mostly through the main channels, but there's a slight variation with some of these wines being bin soiled. So we opened up now over 100 bottles of these wines, and we haven't had one corked wine, which has been quite remarkable. And none of the wines have been oxidized or over the hill. So really, it's a testament to how the Coates family collected their wines. We assisted importing them into South Africa with a refrigerated container. They've been looked after. They've been stored carefully, and that's really important when it comes to fine wine. It loses its value if it's not stored and kept professionally. So yeah, Sunday, 11 o'clock on strauss.co.za. Alistair is going to be auctioning off about 70, 80 lots, mostly first growths, mostly vintage wines. And this is just a small part. I wouldn't say a small part, but it's a part of the Coates cellar that we'll be selling over the next few years. But it is the heart of the great Bordeaux wines. And let's see, the wines are obviously priced closer to market price, but they're hugely valuable wines. And let's see how it goes, Dan.
Let's get a last thought from Emile before we jump over to Jean for last time. Emile, tell us very quickly about those two Ikems that we had to wrap up the night, and then just generally your sense of the majesty of the wine that is available up for auction on Sunday.
Yeah, I'm glad 11 o'clock. I'll try and be there on time. Ikem has been in my household. I was fortunate. My parents were journalists, lived in London, and Ikem's always been sort of ground zero for any kind of sweet wine. And it just I love sweet wines. I love Sauternes, and also indescribable wines. And as Roland said, they could probably age another 50 or 60 years. That balance between that concentrated, decadent sweetness and a riveting acidity that comes through. It makes go back to the terroir. But what, Dan, is interesting to me, and perhaps John can help out here. I'll have a chat to him later over one of the Ozons I pilfered from the evening, is that if you look at the way Bordeaux has evolved, these guys aren't sitting on their laurels. I mean, those older wines up until the 80s, Bordeaux wasn't really using new wood at all. I mean, I was visiting Sylvain Cooperage about 2 months ago with Tastelot from Dimmersdal, another great Bordeaux fan, and they were telling us that up until the late 70s, early 80s, the cooperages were basically restorers of barrels, because the chateau would buy barrels and put the wine in there until the barrels started leaking and falling apart, and then the Sylvain guy would come over and patch them up together again. Then in the 80s, we had new barrels beginning to be used. And then Roland also alluded to the fact that the grapes have been, these days, each berry is selected and there's no mog going in, anything like that. So my question would be, we know that in the 40s and the 50s and some of the 70s even, there were horrendous Bordeaux vintages. I'm trying to think, what would those vintages not have actually worked and been better had those chateaus had access to new barrels and grape sorting and that kind of thing. So it's a great thing about that tasting. It also helps you to ask questions about the way classic wine has evolved over the past 50, 60 years, not only in South Africa, but I mean, in a place like Bordeaux. And during a recent visit to Bordeaux with Taste as well, we went to a couple of wineries like Leeuwil-Poifier and Lynch-Barge and Leeuwil-Baton, and you can just see the attention to detail in the cellar. I mean, I think in Burgundy, they buy a new press every 200 years, and this kind of thing is very rudimentary, those wineries. But in Bordeaux, it looks pretty flash. I mean, there's a lot of stainless steel and computers and everything. So yes, we've had this great lineup. We've been honored to have these fantastic wines. But I personally think that if you're see what's happening in the cellars, making that incredible terroir, getting even the better stuff from that terroir by using scientific winemaking methods. I mean, when we do this tasting again in 70 years' time, and we start tasting wines from the 2010s and 2020s, I think they're even going to be better than this magnificent artifacts that we had put in front of us.
I am salivating Once again, just thinking of those wines and reliving them through the beautiful recollections of Emile and of Roland and of Jean, who actually is a man who's got wine that's probably even harder to get hold of than the wine we have been talking about today, because although it will cost you a bit, it is at least available on auction. Try and find a bottle of Damascene in South Africa. Well, good luck with that. Jean, give us a quick update. The new releases are out. They've been snapped up everywhere. The hype around your wine is extraordinary, and hype almost infers that, well, maybe it's not deserved. It is entirely. People are so excited about the wine because of the sheer quality you are producing. Run us through what has come out, what's new, and whether it takes you by surprise a little, just how quickly these wines going, how excited people genuinely are about what you're producing with Damascene.
Thank you. Yeah, we're also quite stunned of how quickly the fourth vintage also just out the door. On Friday, just reflected with David on yet the first week of launch. Everything is gone. Every single bottle that we had was sold out. So it was. We're really just thankful for the position that we're in, but we also see that there's a massive responsibility of driving this forward. But I think it's also just, like I said, these wines, tapping into things like that. I remember Adi, when I was there my first year, he told me he went to Bordeaux, and one of the proprietors at the Chateau on that side basically said to the group where they were standing, he said, "We're standing on an eel," and Adi said he couldn't understand what the guy was saying, and he was again saying that we're standing on an eel. And after a while, he realized that the guy was trying to say that they're standing on a hill. Obviously, the kind of hills that they have in Bordeaux is completely different to what we have in South Africa. And I think that's something that we need to completely celebrate. All the different terroir that we've got in this country is just phenomenal. And that's what I think with a vintage like 2021, if you look at what all the critics is writing about that in South Africa, it's just one of those years that you need to keep in your cellar for years to come, because it's just screaming with quality. It doesn't matter where it's coming from, pretty much. So I think that's pretty much the underlying highlight, I think, of this vintage that we've put out. It's 8 different wines that we've got from all over the Western Cape. And I think it's just really a snapshot of a fantastic vintage for the entire South Africa. I think there's amazing wines out there as well, other than Damascene. Just go and buy 2021. So it's just really something that you want to have in your cellar. And I think we can be proud of a country of how we've come along to fast track to. I mean, these guys have been doing it for centuries. We've been doing it for just over 300 years. So just how it's been fast tracked, and especially in the past, I would say 20 years of what's happening in Stellenbosch as well with Syrah for the past 5 years. It's really something to be excited about. And I just want people to go out and experience it, and come to the winery as well, and come and taste it with us. But just there's so many exciting labels out there, so just go and enjoy. I think we can all be proud as South Africans for that. And again, for you guys, thank you, Roland, as well, for putting this together. It's just been an unbelievable experience.
I was cornered by Jean at Cape Wine, and then again at this particular dinner. When are you coming out to visit me? Well, Jean, on air, live, I promise that I am coming down to see you. I'll have the cameras in tow, and we'll be able to showcase to everybody just where this sorcery of yours takes place and the Damascene wine emerges from. Just before we wrap up, back to you quickly, Roland, just a reminder, people want to get involved, they want to have a look in advance, see if maybe there is wine that they can possibly look to invest in and to add to their cellars. Run us through the process.
Yeah, so very simple. You need to go through the KYC process on Strauss Art. We need to know the customer, of course. But once you're approved, then you can bid, and you can do it on your phone. You can go to the actual auction in Houghton on Sunday if you'd like. I think Michael Fridjon will probably be the only one in the crowd again. Yeah, it's a very simple process. You can even put a pre-bid in beforehand. So if you're out on your bike or you're still hungover, Dan, you can You can put your bid in before, and you don't have to be there at 11. So there are lots of different ways. You can telephone bid in as well. It's a pretty easy process. But we haven't spoken about the charity, which I think is really important. I've been associated with Spiel for the last 5-6 years, and it's an incredible organization that helps the winelands communities, which we operate in and have been very cherished to partner with over the last 20 years, specifically for me. And this has been a way that I've been able to just help a little bit. And we raised R500,000 for Spiel. They go into a community. They teach the community leaders how to connect with the kids in the community through art and through drama. And I've seen it firsthand how more successful they're able to connect with these children when you're singing, when you're dancing, when you're playing. And these are broken communities, and we need all the help that we can get to try and get some cohesion and move forward in these communities. So Spiel's doing great work, and very happy to have raised money for them too. And thanks for everyone that attended. Obviously, you helped that process. And just one note, I was at another one of these evenings the other night, and of course, who was there? Ibn Sadi, because he tends to be around fine wine. That's his mission. And I said in the tasting, does Ibn drink more Romani Conti because he's Ibn, or is he Ibn because he drinks more Romani Conti? And really, the two go hand in hand. If you want to be the best, be like Ibn, be like Jean, be around those wines, connect with those wines. And when there's an opportunity to produce quality, you always choose the quality path. There's certainly room for more quality wines in South Africa, and that's booming. It's a great part. It's a great being part of this booming business at the moment, Dan.
And it's one that in supporting is not only giving you the opportunity to drink some of the great Bordeaux wine of all time, but you're also helping a charity. This is good karma. You are buying wine for a good cause, at least in part, and that is a wonderful addition to it. Gentlemen, thank you. I've got such good memories of an absolutely delightful night. Roland, I know you and I are hoping to bring something similar up to Johannesburg in the next little while, so keep watching Dan Really Likes Wine for news on that. That, of course, is provided we can get back the wine that accidentally found its way into Emile's boot after the dinner, but we're pursuing that. And of course, if we can't, well, we'll just try and get hold of some Damascene. You can charge the same for that at the moment. That's just how good this wine is. Gentlemen, thank you so much. It's lovely learning from all of you, which I always do. And best of luck with the auction this Sunday, Roland. The rest of us will be watching on and seeing what sort of prices come out for some amazing wine and wine that we all know particularly well. So Jean, Emile, Roland, thank you very, very much for joining us today.
Thanks
for having us.
Thanks, Emile. Thanks, John.
Cheers.
So there we go. Winemaker extraordinaire Jean Smit, wine writer extraordinaire Emile Joubert, and the puppet master of fine wine sales in South Africa, Roland Peens, ahead of Sunday's auction and the chance to invest in names like Petrus and Lafite and Latour and Cheval Blanc and Haut Brion and so many more. Head over to strauss.co.za, have a look at the auction, and you will be blown away by the quality of the wine. I think we might be blown away by some of the prices on Sunday as well, because this is sought after stuff. That wraps us up for today. It's going to be a busy week. I will be down at the Chenin Blanc Congress. Look out for plenty of content over the next 3 days, including a wrap-up show on Thursday with Ken Forrester and Ina Smith leading the South African charge as we pay tribute to a grape that is doing as much as any to keep South African fine wine very much at the forefront of people's thoughts right around the world. So look out for that. Look out for the auction on Sunday and enjoy the rest of your week. Drink South African wine and proudly, but if you can sneak in a bottle or two of vintage Bordeaux, that's not too bad either. Take care. We'll see you Thursday. Goodbye. To join the Pick and Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.